They told me to be quiet while I was screaming in labor. My water had broken, the pain was unbearable, and I was curled up in the back seat of the car, begging for help. But my mother turned to me and said, "Can you keep it down? Your sister is meditating for her mental peace." Then, they pulled over on the highway, opened the door, and left me there, alone, in labor. What they didn't know was, I would survive it all, and one day, they would kneel at my doorstep, crying, begging me to forgive what they did that day. I never thought the people meant to protect me would be the ones to leave me broken and alone, but life has a cruel way of teaching lessons you never asked for. I was 22, pregnant, and abandoned by the man I thought loved me. My last resort was to return home, to the house I grew up in, the same house where I was always treated like an afterthought. My older sister Emily was the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect hair, perfect attitude, or at least, that's how my parents saw her. Me? I was the burden. They said I was emotional, dramatic, a trouble magnet. So when I showed up at their door, belly swollen and eyes swollen from crying, they let me in, but not with love, more like with conditions. I was told to be quiet, keep my moods in check, and not disturb Emily's peace. She had just come back from a wellness retreat in Bali and had transformed into a full-blown energy healer. Now the house was filled with incense, singing bowls, and rules. No loud noises. No negative energy. And definitely no crying. I remember lying awake at night, my back aching, feeling my daughter kick inside me, and hearing Emily chant in the next room while my parents doted on her like she was some kind of prophet. When I told my mother I was scared of giving birth alone, she told me to stop being selfish. Emily was going through a spiritual rebirth, and needed complete silence. I swallowed my fear and said nothing. I always said nothing. But the night labor began, there was no way to stay quiet. It hit me like lightning, sharp, blinding pain that stole the air from my lungs. I screamed. I couldn't help it. My water broke on my bedroom floor, soaking through my mattress, and I cried out again, louder this time. Seconds later, my mother banged on my door, yelling, "Do you have any idea what time it is? Emily is meditating." I sobbed that the baby was coming. My father reluctantly helped me into the car, and Emily followed, complaining that her aura was being damaged by the chaos. As we drove toward the hospital, every bump in the road felt like it was ripping me in half. I was holding my belly, trying to breathe, trying not to scream. Emily turned around and hissed, "Can you not?" My mother added, "We'll pull over if you can't control yourself." I thought she was bluffing, until they actually did it. My father slowed to a stop on a dark stretch of highway and told me to get out. I begged them not to leave me. My mother said calmly, "We'll call an ambulance. You'll be fine." Then the door opened, and I was pushed out into the night. The cold pavement hit my knees as they drove off, red taillights disappearing into the distance. I lay there, in the middle of nowhere, in labor, screaming not just from the pain, but from the unbearable truth that I had been discarded like trash by the people who were supposed to love me most. The night air was sharp against my skin, and the gravel dug into my knees as I tried to lift myself, but the pain was relentless, wrapping around my body like fire. Every contraction was worse than the last, and my screams echoed into the empty highway, swallowed by the darkness. I was terrified, not just of the labor, but of dying there alone. The headlights of passing cars blurred through my tears, none of them stopping. Minutes felt like hours, and I started to lose hope, thinking this might be the way my story ended, on the side of the road, forgotten. But then, out of nowhere, I heard the crunch of tires slowing down. A large truck pulled over a few feet away, and the door swung open. A man climbed out, middle-aged, rough-looking, but with kind eyes. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, running toward me. "Are you okay?" I could barely respond, just sobbed, "Baby's coming." Without hesitation, he took off his jacket, wrapped it around my shoulders, and shouted toward his truck, calling 911 now. He held my hand and said, "Hang in there. Help's on the way." That stranger, his name was Mike, stayed by my side the whole time, wiping the sweat off my forehead with his sleeve, telling me to breathe. He didn't ask why I was there or how I ended up alone. He just stayed. And minutes later, flashing lights appeared, and paramedics rushed in, lifting me gently onto a stretcher, calming me, telling me it would be okay. I gave birth in the back of that ambulance, gripping the side rail as my daughter entered the world with a cry louder and stronger than I ever imagined. I named her Hope. Because that's what she was, hope in the middle of abandonment, strength in the middle of betrayal. The hospital became my temporary shelter, not just for healing but for piecing myself back together. The nurses were angels. One of them, Sarah, stayed after her shift just to hold my hand while I learned how to swaddle my newborn. They gave me a place to rest, clothes to wear, and food to eat. I filed a report about what had happened, but I knew my parents would talk their way out of it, say it was a misunderstanding. I didn't want revenge, I just wanted distance. I applied for a space in a women's shelter and was accepted. It was a small room, barely big enough for a crib and a bed, but it was safe. I stared at my daughter every night as she slept, and I made a promise, no one would ever leave her crying on the side of a road. I started taking small steps toward rebuilding, signing up for food stamps, applying for daycare assistance, and searching for jobs that could work around my schedule. I had nothing but my baby and a will to survive. And somehow, that was enough to start again. I had no idea then how far I'd come, but I knew I would never, ever go back. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and though every step forward felt like dragging myself uphill barefoot, I kept going because I had no choice. Hope depended on me. She became the reason I got out of bed every morning, even when my body ached from sleepless nights and my heart still carried the wounds of being thrown away by my own family. Life in the shelter was far from easy. There were other women and other babies, all of us carrying invisible bruises, all trying to survive, but in that shared struggle, I found something beautiful: community. We exchanged tips on how to stretch a dollar, how to calm colicky babies, and how to survive brokenness without letting it turn us bitter. With the help of a caseworker named Nina, I enrolled in an online certification program in food service management. I had always loved to cook, even as a child, though my mother never let me near her pristine kitchen. Now, I cooked for the other women at the shelter and watched their tired faces soften when they tasted something warm and homemade. It reminded me I still had something to give. When Hope turned 6 months old, I found a part-time job as a dishwasher in a local cafe. It didn't pay much, but it was a foot in the door. I worked hard, showing up early, staying late, scrubbing with blistered hands, and the owner noticed. He gave me a chance to prep salads, then sandwiches, and within a year, I was working the line beside the cooks. I saved every penny, skipping meals some days so Hope could have hers. Eventually, I moved out of the shelter into a tiny studio. Apartment, barely big enough for a crib and a hot plate, but it was ours. I hung a cheap secondhand curtain to divide the room and called it the nursery. Hope started walking in that apartment, her tiny feet pattering on the linoleum, her laughter echoing off the peeling walls. She didn't know the pain I had come from, only love, only safety. That was my greatest victory. By the time she turned 2, I had finished my certification and started pitching catering ideas to small businesses. My first client was a daycare center, then a law firm hosting a weekend brunch. Word spread slowly but surely. I reinvested every dollar into equipment, chafing dishes, uniforms, menus printed from a library computer. My catering business was born in a cramped kitchen with secondhand tools, a crying toddler on my hip, and a fire in my gut that refused to die. The more people said it couldn't be done, the harder I worked. And when I finally landed a wedding gig for a local politician's daughter, I knew everything was about to change. My hands had once trembled in fear, now they served guests confidently. Plated with precision, and created beauty from ingredients others ignored. I had no family name, no connections, no help. But I had grit. And that, I learned, was enough to build an empire. The wedding that changed everything was held in a grand estate just outside the city, a place with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and guests who arrived in black cars with private drivers. I had never stepped foot in a place like that. Much less worked one. My team, just 3 women from the shelter and a teenage boy who helped carry trays, were nervous, but we moved like we belonged. Every plate was arranged with care, every bite crafted like a message. We are here, and we are good at what we do. I wore a second-hand blazer that didn't quite fit and kept Hope's photo in my pocket like a lucky charm. That night, I worked harder than I ever had. I smiled through exhaustion, wiped down countertops between courses, and adjusted bow tie napkins a dozen times just to get them perfect. And it worked. The event went off without a flaw. The bride hugged me. The guests asked for business cards. And a food blogger who had been invited to the wedding posted a glowing review with pictures of my dishes, calling me the surprise star of the evening. Within days, my inbox was full. Requests poured in, from engagement parties, baby showers, corporate lunches. Suddenly, my little kitchen couldn't keep up. I rented a commercial space, hired 2 full-time staff, and bought a van with my business logo. I was still exhausted, still barely sleeping, but this exhaustion tasted different and sweeter, filled with purpose. Hope, now 4, would sit in the office corner with crayons while I planned menus, her giggles filling the room where I made dreams real. And then, like a shadow returning from the past, my parents showed up. They walked into my office unannounced one afternoon, my mother holding a bouquet of lilies, my father in a suit I didn't recognize. Emily was with them too, still dressed in soft white, her hair braided like a halo. My breath caught in my throat when I saw them. For a moment, I was back on that highway, alone and screaming. My mother stepped forward, tears already spilling. "We're so proud of you," she said. "We didn't know you had it in you." My father added, "We've fallen on hard times. Emily's business closed. We were hoping, maybe you could help us out. Even a small loan." Emily gave a half smile. "Or maybe a position in your company. I'd love to be part of something healing and meaningful." I stared at them, all 3, standing in the office I built from blood and hunger. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, imagined what I'd say, how I'd hurt them back. But I didn't feel rage. Just silence. Cold, empty silence. I stood up, slowly, walked to the door, and held it open. "I'm not the same girl you left on the highway," I said quietly. "That girl begged. This woman doesn't." They pleaded again. My mother dropped to her knees. But I didn't bend. I walked past them, out into the sunshine, toward the car where Hope waited, smiling. Behind the window. My past had come crawling, but my future was already holding my hand. Life didn't return to peace after that day, it evolved into something stronger, something more honest. I drove home from that meeting with my parents feeling a strange calm. Not the explosive triumph I once imagined, but a quiet closure. For the first time, I realized I didn't need revenge or dramatic goodbyes. I had already won. The woman I had become didn't need validation from the ones who left her behind. Hope was waiting at home, her curls bouncing as she ran into my arms, chattering about a drawing she made and a new friend at preschool. She didn't know about betrayal or pain, she just knew that I came home every day, tired but smiling, full of love and safety. That night, I sat on the couch, holding her tiny body against mine, and I thought about how far we'd come. From gravel and blood on a cold highway to warmth and bedtime stories in our own apartment. My business continued to grow, clients came. From all over, drawn by the story, yes, but more by the taste of something real in every dish. I hired women like me, survivors, single mothers, women who had been silenced too long. We didn't just feed people. We reminded them that healing has flavor, that strength could be plated and served with pride. My company became known not just for food, but for its mission. Journalists wrote features. Invitations to speak at conferences arrived. I turned down a reality TV offer. I didn't want fame. I wanted dignity, purpose, and a life my daughter could be proud of. Years passed. Hope started grade school, then middle school, growing more like her name every day, bright, curious, unbreakable. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring at me while I worked in the kitchen, and she'd say, "Mommy, I want to be strong like you." And I'd smile, hide the tears in my eyes, and tell her the truth, "You already are." As for my parents, they never got that loan, never stepped foot in my life again. I heard from someone that they eventually moved to a smaller town and lived quietly, ashamed or maybe still in denial. I didn't care. I didn't hate them anymore. I simply forgot them. Because the life I had now, this life, wasn't built on their approval. It was built on grit, sweat, sleepless nights, and a fierce love that never gave up. I often told my story at shelters and women's centers, looking into the eyes of girls who thought their pain was permanent. I told them what I had learned. On that highway, sometimes, the people who leave you behind are doing you the biggest favor. They force you to find strength you never knew you had. And when you do, you don't just survive, you rise. So, in the end, I didn't need apologies. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need closure from the ones who shut the door. I built a new door, opened it myself, and stepped into a life I made with my own hands. Not in spite of the pain, but because of it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Silent Revenge for more powerful stories that speak louder than words.